Well, good morning and a very warm welcome, everyone who's live here, and hello to those who joined in the last few minutes. I didn't get time to say a personal hello and welcome, and also a very warm welcome, good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are, to those who are joining this on YouTube later. So today is the first of 9 teachings on the third Karmapa's revealing the essence of the Tathagatas, let's call the title like that, which is a key text for us on Buddha nature teachings. But as you know, today is also a standalone teaching on the 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma, a very, very important classical topic in Tibetan Buddhism. And so we need that in order to understand where the Buddha nature teachings sit within the whole context of Buddha Dharma. So today is standalone. It's also what we need to know before our 8 sessions on Karmapa's text. So as always, when we practice or when we study Dharma, then we need to do it, as we heard in recent teachings, for those of you who are regulars, we need to do it in the Mahayana way, so that what we're doing for us really is moving us towards a Buddha's enlightenment and out of the repetitive patterns of a worldly mind, and then we need to do it in a way which is beneficial for others. So please, let's do our very best to turn our hearts in loving care to all of our fellow beings, and very especially to those with whom we have karmic connection in this life. They're important to us, they're important to our mind, they're part of our mind through all of what happens with brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers, children, friends, enemies, lovers. It's like being dealt a hand of cards. That's our karmic hand of cards for this life. And our mind's relationship with those people is very important. But then, beside including those, we make our big mind by extending it to embrace all sentient beings throughout all the various universes, multiverses, whatever there are, and think, I'm here learning so that I can serve and help and befriend all those beings better and better as the future lives go by. It's a solemn, wonderful promise. And so we try and listen very attentively, with an open heart, with an open mind. And then we do so from a position of loving care for our own mind. We want to nurture it with wisdom and truth. And then with loving care for other beings. And then with great joy. The joy of Dharma, because Dharma is forever and all the rest isn't. The rest comes and goes. No matter how wonderful or how awful, it's always impermanent. Dharma is the underlying truths that will never change. And we are so lucky to meet an opportunity to work with those truths. So anyway, with great, all those qualities, joy, a big mind, a loving heart, let's do a few very simple prayers. Sonje chodon soji chonomla jancho bandun dane chapsunje. Dagi jinso jipe sonamje. Trola penchara sanje drop parasho. Sem chen tamche dewa tang dewe jodang dem parajoche. Dongal dang dokmal ji jodang tralwara joche. Dongal mepe dewa tampa tang men tralwara joche. Nyerin chatan ne tang tralwe tan yong chenpo la ne parajore chin. Deyata shame shamavati shamata shatro Mam kuri marajite karota ke orita jovate olo yame Vishuddhanya male malapana ye kukure kaka grasana umuki Paramuke amuke shamme dawane savagraha bandhanani negri Hitva sava bhava pravadina vimukta marabhasha Savitva buddha mudra no gatita savamare butsarita Parishuddhe bhiga shantu savamara kama. Palin sawe lama rinpoche Dagye wara pende den shola. Kadrin chenpo gune jizonte. Kuson tuche madrup sangtu sol. Thank you. I was mentioning before today's meeting, in our 15 minutes where we just say hello and catch up, that today's challenging for me because there is the classical Tibetan presentation of the three turnings of the Wheel of Dharma, and then there is, if you say, the context of that. And I was explaining something that a very, very wonderful teacher, Khenpo Trorsen, with whom I had the honor to work for many, many years. Sorry, I'm just looking at the technicalities of what's going on. Zoom's doing weird things on my screen. Okay, never mind. So yeah, Khenpo Trorsen, and we had a lot of time together, 6 years of research and conversations, and probably most of you don't know of him. He was a master in Tibet. He's the person who saved so much of Tibetan medicine, and especially very ancient alchemical techniques for making what they call precious pills and so on. Anyway, and he was one of the teachers of the present Karmapa. So he said, Rinpoche's lamas, he said, there are two sorts. There are old brains and new brains. The old brains receive the teachings. They don't question it. It's incredibly sacred because it's the tradition. They got it from their teachers that they respect, and they pass it on as best they can to the next generation. He says, it's very good. A huge quality is that in that way, some things have stayed pretty much the same over centuries, even millennia. Then he said there are the new brains, and these are the minds that are inquisitive and that think about what they've received, and especially if they're lamas and rinpoches, think about what they're passing on and think, is this really the case? Is this true? Yes, but what's the context? All these sort of very reasonable questions. So the advantage of this is that it's an open-minded possibility of continually improving things and seeing maybe what wasn't so good and then what new things can be brought on board. The disadvantage is that it can really mess up what was a beautiful and very pure tradition. So anyway, I was giving 2 examples. I'll give them again because it's important. In Tibetan medicine, for instance, there was the second Yutok, who was a new brain, who really thought about things and who pulled together so much about Tibetan medicine, and then from his brilliant mind gave an overview that gives us Tibetan medicine as we have it today. Somebody really capable of tremendous insight and willing to say, no matter what the teachings say, if it doesn't work, throw it away. And if there's something that's not in the teachings, but it really works, then think about incorporating it. So he was a new brain that did so many wonders. There was another sort of new brain, and let's not mention who he was, but very, very important in Tibetan history, who upgraded Tibetan astrological calculations wrongly. So instead of making them better, it made them worse. But most Tibetan calendars these days still use his system. So we have to be careful. But anyway, there is the traditional teaching and the context. So today I want to speak a little bit first about the context, and I have to be very careful with time so I don't lose the session just doing that. We are Buddhists, we are 20th century, 21st century people coming to something out of nowhere. We need to know what we are taking on if we're going to dedicate ourselves to it, especially for the rest of our lives, and if it's going to be so important for us, that we're really committed and we're willing to change ourselves in many ways because of that, then we do need to know. And what I wanted to say earlier is what is a great comfort to me is our present 17th Karmapa is a new brain. And so a couple of years ago, he started teaching an introduction to Vajrayana Buddhism, thinking it would be brief. But the more he researched and then the more he got help with researching the evolution of Buddhism from the time of Buddha onwards, the more he realized what a wonderful and complicated story it is. And so he's now taken a couple of years and he's still not got anywhere near the beginnings of Vajrayana Buddhism emerging in India. The history is very, very important. How Buddhism evolved in its first 1,000 years or so, first 1,600 years actually, is very, very important. So we're going to have a little look, because we're going to be studying for 8 weeks the Buddha nature teachings. And through the teachings of the third Karmapa, based on the teachings of a Sangha, and of course based on the teachings of the Buddha, we hope and expect all the different Buddhist traditions must believe that their one's the most authentic, otherwise you wouldn't be in it. So Zen think they've got the best, Theravada think they've got the best, Vajrayana think they've got the best, the real thing, what the Buddha's intention, in Tibetan called Gongpa, the Buddha's intention, very, very important term in the scriptures. What was the Buddha really intending us to understand? So let's take a look first at where is it? There. Okay, I need to share a file on screen. Oops. Wrong. Share the screen. Okay. Thank you. Can you put up a hand if you can see the diagram? Yep, good. Thank you. So what we see here, starting at the bottom, life of Buddha, 623 BC to 543, consensus opinion. And then we see how it developed in India for the next, 6 centuries. Also, it developed in Sri Lanka, starting from 3 centuries BC. So for a couple of hundred years, it was only in India. First place it went to Sri Lanka. And then if we come up to the year 0, then we start to see Mahayana emerging in India. At the same time, the Buddha's teaching goes to Burma, Myanmar, and Thailand. And then it goes also to Sri Lanka again, a second wave. It goes to China, Pure Land teachings first, and then China and Korea, what became Chan and Zen. We see from the 5th century onwards, Vajrayana enters the monasteries. Before that, it was small ashrams, gurus, practicing. That's the very nature of Vajrayana. You practice, not monasteries, libraries, complicated structures. So we've no idea really what happened. It was just people up mountains in caves practicing. But once it starts coming into the monasteries, we have a trace. So from the 5th century onwards, up to the 12th century, then we have Vajrayana in India. If you look to the right, you see in the 6th century, Chan goes to China. And then in the 8th century, Buddhism goes to Tibet. Now the point here, quickly, is Tibet is only then 1,500 years after the Buddha's teaching, and when Buddhism had already been many, many hundreds of years, mainly in China. So Tibet got its Buddhism from China and from India. And Tibetans being Tibetans, and the way it was introduced being the way it was introduced, then they, let's just look at one more thing here before I close this window. 12th century, 13th century, Buddhism disappears from India. Disappears. Gone. So then it only exists abroad. In what? The Sri Lankan version, the Chinese version, the Tibetan version, the Japanese version, the Korean version. Quite different from each other. And the motherland, gone. So anyway, we need to know that. And okay, here I am. Back on screen. So Tibetans received, and mainly from China, and mainly from the tradition of the Samdhinamana in Nimochana Sutra, this understanding that the Buddha taught in 3 phases or on 3 levels. And they take that as a given. That was very well established in Chinese Buddhism. It became the Tibetan understanding. That there were 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma. Why do we call it turning the wheel of Dharma? We'll come to that in a second. But now let's look at something else. Okay. Okay, can you see? Put up a hand if you can see. Good. Okay, so this is a timeline, and it's very, very important for us to understand this. It starts on the left, so you've got the Buddha, the Buddha's teaching, whatever it was. Nobody wrote it down at the time. We had no foreign witnesses. We had, well, the first council where the Buddha's teachings were recorded. So the Karmapa spent 1 year's teaching mainly around this and Ananda and the authenticity of this. But if you look on this diagram, you'll see that the Buddha's teaching was only an oral tradition for many hundreds of years. We need to know that and think about it a lot. What does it mean? We know, everybody agrees, he taught for 45 years, probably every day for 45 years. One very precious experience for us these days, for me especially, is to be very close to eminent teachers and to see what goes on. To see in particular how different people, like in Samiling, or like if you're traveling with whoever it is, Taisitupa Gyalwa Rinpoche, how people get what they each need, but they only get a certain slice of the cake. And then some things are very public. These days, some things are recorded, they're widespread. Some things happen for a small group of people. Nobody else would never even know that the Rinpoche gave those teachings, that these people are practicing it. It's very quiet, and then beside the actual teachings, even for one teaching, if you've got 50 people sitting, you might have one person who's really on, let's say, approaching the level of the Rinpoche who's teaching, who is getting it in one way. And the other people, each in their own way and on different levels, are hearing the same words, feeling the same presence, getting the same message on very, very different levels. So if we extrapolate what we see so clearly now, the different way one hour teaching by a Rinpoche is received by the people who are present. Then if we go back to the time of Buddha and think of him teaching in a land where people were already great meditators. Some of his first disciples, like Kashyapa, the 3 Kashyapa brothers, they came with thousands of their own disciples, very competent meditators. And then some people very brilliant at learning, like Ananda, like Shariputra, sharp, wonderful minds. He's teaching these every day for 45 years. So then all of that is somehow conserved as an oral tradition. How do you do that? What survives out of all of that? What can survive? So what did survive was eventually written down, and this is where it gets interesting, he says, looking at the clock. So you've got here the first Sanskrit texts that we've found. They were probably and very likely written before that, but on perishable materials, but are from about 100 BC. Common Era, not BC, Common Era. First Sanskrit texts. The first Pali texts were said to be written. So they're the Sanskrit texts we've actually found. I'll show you in a minute. But remnants of them. Remnants of texts from 100 BC, or that first century BC. The first Pali texts were said to be written around the year 0, just afterwards. But in terms of what are the earliest Pali texts we've actually got, the earliest ones come from 600 after Asanga. And we've only got them because they were carved on gold and hidden in a stupa in Burma. Paper texts for hundreds of years after that. But anyway, we can believe the Pali version that their first texts were written in the year 0. Texts were written, they weren't important at first. They became more and more important in this 1st century BC, and afterwards Buddhist scholasticism emerged, universities, huge places where people came to study and learn, and the old libraries that had the original texts and so on. The first sutras that talk about the Buddha teaching in 3 turnings emerged around this period. You can see here it's sort of 1st, 2nd centuries of our era. Nagarjuna time, especially one called the Samdinya Mochana Sutra, which was originally in Sanskrit, no traces of that left, but it was translated into Chinese and then integrated into Tibetan. That talks, and those group of sutras talk about 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma. Nagarjuna is mainly about 2 turnings of the wheel of Dharma, Hinayana, Mahayana. So around 4th century of our era, we get a Sangha who really elucidates the 3 turnings, and in particular the 3rd turning, very, very clearly through a text that much of my life, Katya's life, has been devoted to translating at the request of the 16th Karmapa, Mahayana Uttara Tantra Shastra. This Mahayana Uttara Tantra Shastra became the basis for Buddha nature teachings for all the Tibetan schools. However, even though a Sangha wrote it and it's recorded, it disappeared from common use in India. And we have to go to here, to Maitripa, 1500 years after the Buddha, a few centuries after Guru Rinpoche took Buddhism to Tibet. Maitripa, who was one of Marpa's gurus, found a copy of a Sangha's text on Buddha nature, elucidating the 3 turnings sutras, hidden inside a stupa. Wonderful story. He was circumambulating. It was an old stupa with a crack in it, and he started seeing light coming from the crack. And he must have had some power, because he managed to convince them to open the stupa. You don't take stupas apart readily. And then in there was, so Maitripa is seen as a sort of a re-emanation of a Sangha. And so then those teachings were brought to life. Okay, let's leave this. This is just scratching the surface. It's the tip of the iceberg of the history. So anyway, Tibetans believed there was the 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma. Now, if I can just still be inside context for a tiny, tiny bit, I need to share a couple of things more. This one, can you see? Yeah, please put a hand up. Yep, good. This is Kharoshthi script written on birch bark. Okay, so I don't know if when you were a kid you took the bark off of birch trees and wrote on it secret letters. It's amazing these survive. So this was found in Afghanistan, Pakistan, around the Swat Valley. And it was for sale in a marketplace by very clever traders who realized that Westerners were interested in old pots. Now, this was an old pot, an urn, that was sealed. But because there were other old pots found before that looked like it, they knew that inside it were texts. Unfortunately, the pots that were sold before were bought by French researchers who found the birch bark texts and tried unrolling them. And oh dear, the first one fell into dust. And then the next one, they didn't manage to unroll any of them. So whole pots full of these treasures, the oldest written treasures in Asia. The oldest written treasures in Asia, the oldest Buddhist texts in the world, were just crumbled into dust because people didn't know how to unroll the rolls of scripture. So in 1994, some of these were bought by people who now had the methods to use all sorts of techniques to x-ray them and unroll them. And since then, more than 200, I think, things have been bought. Anyway, it's a long story. We don't have time. This is simply to show you part of the oldest texts in the whole world, which were actually in those pots were probably waste paper bins. They needed to get rid of texts because they were too crumbly. They needed to copy them. And to respect the old ones, they put them in the pots and sealed them. Thank goodness that we've got that. So the oldest texts that we know are Sanskrit. These were copied in Kharosthi language. They were translations of earlier Sanskrit texts from India. All of that's fascinating. No more time, except now we have to go to, and I would love to say, but I mustn't. I must be very, very careful with speech. We can't call it a con trick or a rip-off. Definitely not. We mustn't say those words. But something that I've heard again and again and again in all my Buddhist teaching life, which is that the Pali Canon and the Theravada Buddhism was the original one. All the other things, a bit less pure, were later developments and not the authentic, the original, the only teaching of the Buddhas. Many people think that. Many people have left Tibetan Buddhism to go back to the pure and original one with the Theravadas. There is no proof for this. There is no evidence for this. And in fact, you need to know what happened. In two ways. One is you need to know about King Parakamabbahu, who was a king of Ceylon, Sri Lanka. Until him, on the island of Sri Lanka, Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana practice existed very well together, sometimes all in the same monastery, sometimes with their own specialized monasteries. The monks got on very well together. There was some corruption in general in the Sangha all over. But anyway, this king was a military king, and he had his own strong ideas. So he conquered a lot of South India. He conquered a lot of Burma. He had military raids. He was very Theravada. And he said, everyone converts to Theravada. All the monasteries convert to Theravada, all the monks change, or else they have to demonk, they have to leave the island. And he said, Theravada is the only and the pure version of the Buddha's teaching. And with his conquests of Burma, some other Southeast Asian countries, this idea we are the original and the best, which you find in reformers in religions all over the world, became, how can you say, the party line of Theravada. Nowadays, and especially based on the findings of those Koroshti scripts, the Sanskrit scripts, this whole idea of one root. So I need to share another diagram with you. I can find it. Give me a moment. Oh dear, where is it? Oh, yeah. Okay. Can you see this? Hand up, please, if you can see. Okay. What you have on the left is what people took based on the Theravada version, and they believed that the Pali Canon was the earliest written scriptures and so on, is this idea of one trunk. The Buddha taught. There were his basic teachings that we have as the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, and that bit by bit, as the centuries passed, then Mahayana and Vajrayana and different schools emerged from that one original teaching. Modern scholastic research, even by Theravada scholars, says that no, that couldn't have been the case. So what we have on the right is the bramble bush, where instead of there being one original trunk, from the earliest days of Buddhism, there were various versions, attitudes, visions of the Buddha's teaching. What we would call Hinayana versions. Now there were 18 schools, only one of them survived, became the Theravada school and so on. But there were many from the start. There was no one original pure teaching. So anyway, that's me and history and a brief kind of view finished. So now let's look at the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma. How do Tibetans understand the Buddha's teaching? So the way it's presented is as three turnings of the wheel of Dharma. So let's look at that phrase, turn the wheel of Dharma. And it's based on wheels, of course, but especially the old water wheels for taking water out of a stream, where you have leather buckets that go around. So the wheel goes round and comes back to the same place, and goes round and comes back to the same place. It's the turning of a wheel. So the idea is that in different universes, in different worlds, and at different times, great teachers come along and they share the basic truths of existence, which are just the way it is. They use language, formulae, appropriate for the times, appropriate for the age, that people can understand. And in the Buddha's teaching, even in the world of animals, it doesn't have to be animals that actually speak human words, but animals that can teach other animals kindness and all sorts of qualities. So these universal truths, however they can be taken in, according to the porosity of the mind, the receptivity, the openness, the maturity of the mind, then the truths will be conveyed by skillful teachers through their teachings, which then, after they're gone, become religions and become all that kind of stuff. So the turning of the wheel of Dharma, again and again, wherever it is, the same old inevitable truth, because it's just the way it is. It's the way life is, it's the way mind is, it's the way spiritual experience is, and so on. And that's the counterpart for another wheel that turns, which is samsara, the wheel of existence, which is like a Swiss watch, hundreds and hundreds of cogs inside it. So the repetitive patterns of our anger, jealousy, pride, desire, faith, diligence, good qualities, our actions are repetitive. We get into power trips again and again. We fall in love again and again. We have a tendency, a habit, so it makes circumstances repeat themselves. Karma. So anyway, samsara is a wheel. Dharma is a wheel. And we have the very famous first teaching of the Buddha, which is presented very, very famously through the Dhammacakra Pavatana Sutra, the sutra of the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. That's the actual name. So we say the Buddha turned the wheel of Dharma. So let's have a look at that briefly. One of the reasons I sent out the support document is that you've got a very, how can you say, systematically written expose of the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma, in case I don't manage to do all of it today. It's kind of my safety backup to know that you've got the information somewhere. I want to tell you what you won't find in the books, but that I've received through various teachers and so on. So let's go back to one of those earlier diagrams. I won't put it on screen, but there was an oral tradition. How do you remember? They didn't have books. It's not as though they kept it oral and they had books somewhere to refer to. They didn't have books. Writing was for merchants to record their goods only. If something was spiritual, you took it into your heart. You learnt it by heart because it was so precious and so valuable. The Buddha's discourses, they had some of his disciples had total recall, clear minds. They reproduced them. In the rains retreat, when they have months of where you can't do much except sit indoors and practice, they repeated and repeated the teachings. So if we look at this Dhammacakra Pavatana Sutra, the Buddha's first teaching, they learnt a condensed version of it. But I think there are Buddhists all over the world who, when they see that first teaching, it fills about 2 A4 pages about the Buddha talking about the middle way, the Four Truths, the Eightfold Path. I think many people think he actually just sat down and said that to the 5 ascetics. Even they call it the first sermon. I don't know why they call it sermons, but anyway, it's an English word. So you imagine the Buddha plonking himself down and saying, now 5 disciples, and then saying the words that are in. No way. But for an oral tradition, if you learn that sutra, the condensation of weeks and weeks of teaching, then you've got something in mind about how it all started, the Buddha's first teaching. What happened? Buddha got enlightened, Bodhi tree, Bodh Gaya these days. And then he didn't do anything to start with. He was enlightened. For 7 weeks, he stayed, depending on the different versions, what he did in those 7 weeks. Sometimes he just sat, sometimes he sat here, sometimes he sat by a little lake that was near the Bodhi tree, sometimes he walked backwards and forwards, mindfully meditating. And he didn't teach. And so you'll read all sorts of explanations for that, which aren't really very good. But the main point is that an enlightened being does not proselytize. doesn't go out and try and convert people or convince them. Teaching is on request. So it says that the devas of this world, the sublime minds that are behind the fabric of our experience of existence, more subtle minds, Brahma, Indra, and so on, very aware of what's going down on the planet, but in a much more subtle state of being than we are, in a different state of manifestation, embodiment. They asked the Buddha to help the world on behalf of the world. This is the essence of Dharma teaching. You don't go out and change people. When they're ready, they will come and ask. And you give what they're capable of receiving and what they want to receive. Those two things, what they want and what they're capable of handling, on request. That's the ethic of Buddhist teaching. So anyway, Buddha, with his brilliant enlightened mind, knew that his first 5 disciples would be the 5 ascetics he'd been practicing with for 6 years. They were over in Sanat at the deer park, and so he went to them. They thought he was a loser. They thought because he'd given up asceticism, so they left him to get on with it. He'd started eating a lot of food and drinking, and so not drinking alcohol, drinking milk, things like this. So they thought, well, he's given up. They left him. But when he arrived eventually at the deer park and they saw him coming, that's all they needed. His presence was it, as we saw with about 16th Karmapa. The presence told everything. You didn't need words, teachings, anything. His presence was it. So the 5 disciples realized, oh, something's happened. So when we look at another sutra, the Arya Pariyasana Sutra, which in fact looks like, from historical research, earlier than the Turning the Wheel of Dharma Sutra. There we see what is logically the whole truth of the matter, that Buddha taught them for many weeks, because they said, what's happened? What is it? What's the new thing on the block? What made you like you are? And so he taught them. One day 3 would study with him, and the other 2 would go begging and getting food for them. The next day, the 2 would study with him and get what they missed, and the other 3 would go out begging. So like that, over quite some weeks, the Buddha taught that the difference came through jhana, wisdom. They'd all studied with great meditation teachers. They'd mastered the dhyanas. They had profound meditation experience. They worked with their chakras and all of that stuff, found incredible serenity, absorption, blissfulness, states of mind. What was missing, and what's mentioned in that text, was jhana, wisdom, not 4 truths. They come later. And I'm not going to have time to tell you about that. And it's a blooming nuisance, because it's really, really interesting why the 4 truths are a big deal in Theravada Buddhism, and why they're in their place, the proper place, according to the Buddha's teaching in Mahayana and Vajrayana Buddhism. But anyway, when we look at those earliest things, the earliest sutras, in the Theravada tradition, there, from the earliest, the agamas, the explanation of the Buddha's teaching, then we see that the Buddha taught wisdom. Doesn't mention the 4 truths. So over many weeks. So how do you put that into something so short and pithy that people can remember the basis? So that's why we have the Turning the Wheel of Dharma Sutra. So There, the Buddha establishes the foundation message in this first turning of the wheel of Dharma. It's the foundation for all the rest. It's the one and only message we all need. There is suffering. There is suffering that doesn't need to be. The cause of that suffering, ego, egotism, selfishness that makes us proud, that makes us get angry, that makes us need, that makes us jealous, makes us ignorant to the real truth of what life is. Cause of that suffering we need to understand. We don't need to be damaging ourselves with pride and jealousy and egotism. We don't need to be damaging others because of those. And all of that creates karma. And karma brings us back together again in conflict situations, desire situations. It could be never ending. It's so much unnecessary pain, and sometimes such appalling pain. This is the heart message of Buddha, how to stop that pain. So, in fact, first of all, can we get out? Is there such a thing as nirvana, release? Yes. And then how do we get out? The path of Dharma. This basic message, get out of suffering. Now, the ethic of Dharma is you don't go and tell other people how to get out of suffering before you've done it yourself. Going out there telling other people what's wrong with you, and this is your ego, and that's that, when you're not even recognizing your own, is rubbish. It won't work, it's not ethical, it's totally upside down and wrong. So the whole point of Dharma teaching is first and foremost, we must understand the harm we are causing. We must find ahimsa, the way where we stop harming. First and foremost, we must stop harming other people. What damages us, our anger, our pride, our confused thinking, will take many years to handle. We can't stop that so quickly. We need meditation and many, many tools. But first things first, we must stop hurting other people, which is why monks and nuns renounced. They tried to put in place all of the most helpful factors so that they wouldn't have the stimuli that bring about so much of anger and desire and so on. But anyway, that first message is the essential one. The Buddha shared with everybody. So that's the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. In the first turning, then the Buddha needs to show people the path, the way of Dharma, and which later on in the Theravada system is summed up as the Eightfold Path. That's okay. But the actual Eightfold Path is not the noble Eightfold Path. I've said this many times in these teachings, but the Eightfold Path of noble beings. So when we find Buddha's teachings on the Eightfold Path, it's at a very advanced stage. Let me see if I can find it. Either I can or I can't. Yes. Oops, no. There we go. So, can you see this one? Yes, good. Okay. So this is according to every school of Buddhism. This chart, we start from a beginner, bottom left, we end up liberated, top right. We have to go through 5 stages: accumulation, integration, insight, and so on. The phase of insight is where you won't go back to samsara ever again. You are definitively out. It's at that phase, if you look on the right, it says the accompanying factors are called the 7 aspects of awakening. This is all about the 4 noble truths. Only then do the 4 truths really come into their own. When people are out, they realize the suffering of people who are in samsara. You need to get out to realize what a blooming mess it is. So widespread, so deeply permeated in the cells of life. So then only after the phase of insight and the 4 noble truths is there the phase of cultivating the insight, and that's where you have the 8-fold path of realized beings. These are the proper places. If you look in the Visuddhimagga, the main textbook for Theravada, you'll find this is the same template. But these things, 4 truths, 8-fold path, have been taken out and put into a simplified version to help beginners. There's nothing wrong with that, but we need to know where they belong. So anyway, the Buddha needed to teach a path. What is the path out of that horrible and needless suffering? It's to understand what is this ego that causes it. What are these delusions of me and my needs and everything that we solidify, either on a local level, just the way everybody feels like themselves and defines themselves, or on a sacred level where you might believe you have a timeless soul, that somewhere up there, upstairs in the cosmos, there's a forever Ken Holmes. There ain't, but sometimes religion can sort of amp up these ideas to an incredibly high level. So Buddha's path, whatever the details are about meditation and so on, the path needs to get rid of ego. The core delusion of ego is based on a oneness. I am me. There is a me, a sort of a one me. So the basis of the path says, oh yes, that's interesting. Okay, so come and let's sit down and let's meditate and let's find the me. What do you find? Then Buddha gives us a whole science. He says, look, what just happened there? You had a feeling. You were happy about something. Butterfly flew past. Oh, you felt happy. Look, that was a happy feeling. And then, oh, and something else flew by, but it was a mosquito. And that was an unhappy feeling, unpleasant feeling. Look, that was an unpleasant feeling. And now, what happened there? You just saw something. You just felt something. That's seeing consciousness. That's body consciousness. This is hearing consciousness. And then, what did you think about that when you saw it? What thoughts went through your head? That's your cognitive library, your cognitive processes. So he teaches them the 5 aggregates, the 5 groups of things, the forms that fill our mind, form all the different alphabets of our experience, all the images you've got in your mind from your life, your library card, it's your library. And then the feelings we have about it, number 2, the cognitive processes, number 3, the various workings of the mind in all their complexity, and especially the mind poisons and the mind virtues, and then the play of consciousness, 6 consciousnesses. He taught them the 5 aggregates. And he says, these are real. Check it out. Sit down, meditate, watch how it works, how one triggers the other. And so, visual consciousness sees buttered toast. That makes a nice feeling. And then cognitive process remembers, goes to samskaras, number 4, skandha, and brings up memories of all the buttered toast moments you've had. And then you think, I quite like a buttered toast. Still got to be sitting for 10 more minutes, but when I finish sitting, I'll make myself a slice of toast. Watch it working. You'll see the 5 skandhas in all of their details, like skandha number 4, samskaras, mental activity, has 51 main categories. So he got his followers to observe these at work. He said, this is what you really are. You are not one person. You are your own soup of all these things, and you can change it. You can change each part of that so that you're liberated. So anyway, he gave them this language of things. The Sanskrit word for things is dharma, so that they could see who I really am, moment to moment, day to day, not this idea of a one me. And so they get over the core reason for samsara, which is ego, and it's replaced by a flow of dharmas with the 3 marks of existence. What's happening is impermanent. It usually leads to suffering. And in there is no fixed self, no ego. Impermanence, suffering, no ego, the 3 marks of existence. As you follow your path of freedom from ego, and if you follow that through all the way through the end, through all the subtleties of shamatha meditation, you can end up an arhat. You will never suffer again. You will never be reborn in a samsaric existence again. This is the basis for us all. We have to recognize there is no self, one single self. Realize what is truly going on and stop it, because it's pain, it's suffering. But then amongst the Buddha's audience, there are those who are ready for another message on top of this, not different, on top of this. It's not just you can get yourself out, but you can help others. Suffering is so much so the whole Bodhisattva teaching comes with a second turning of the wheel of Dharma for those who are ready, for those who can take it. And if somebody can't take it, it's not a good idea to teach them, because they're going to end up in tears. It's such a beautiful idea to dedicate all your existences that are left to helping others. But once you start and try and realize how hard that is, some are ready for it. They have the heart, they have the past, they have the karma. They are ready to become bodhisattvas. Others aren't, and so there is no point breaking their hearts by telling them how they might be in some ideal world, but practically they can't. So through the power of the Buddha's beautiful mind and the way it drew people to him at the right time and in the right place, he taught the way of the bodhisattva. As 2 things. One of them is this compassion, is that we can, as we're working on our own story to liberate it, we can also be learning how to help others as a bodhisattva. So there's the compassion aspect. But then there's a wisdom aspect as well. And that is not just all the wisdom he taught about ego doesn't exist because it's all these components, the 5 aggregates, all the subdivisions, but that even all those components don't exist. Just like ego doesn't exist because there are really all those components, no one ego. When we look at any of those components, they are what? Helpful ideas. Very good helpful ideas. They can get you out of suffering. That's pretty good. But they are ideas in the mind of the beholder, not out there in reality. So we get the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, which is summed up in something you've probably seen, which is called the Heart Sutra, which wasn't a sutra because the Buddha didn't teach it. And it doesn't mean heart, it means actually the essential nature of things, but never mind. It's called the Heart Sutra. And there, all the things the Buddha had taught in the first turning to help people out of their ego have become solid for those people. So you can become really smart observer of your mind. Aha. This thought, aha, that feeling. Seeing consciousness, boing, hearing consciousness, and so on and so on. Virtuous response to something, non-virtuous response becomes so real. So Buddha gets people to look into that. What's happening? And we see those things as so, you can't find them. So all the teachings on shunyata, voidness, that Nagarjuna so beautifully elucidated, and then his followers elucidated more. That's the second turning of the wheel of Dharma. It could happen at any time. But in particular, looking back, and then according to the sutras, like the Chinese sutras about the second turning, then it seems many of these teachings were given on what is called the Vulture Peak. Vulture Peak is near Rajgir. So it's a very nice area. A lot happened there. Buddha was there a lot. Down in the valley, you've got the famous bamboo grove, where many thousands of monks established themselves, meditated, received teachings. Then you climb up the hill. You've got the Satipat, I forget the name exactly, but the caves where the first council was held. Marvelous caves, and where Mahakashyapa meditated, and where many Mahayana teachings were given. I have a suspicion, this is just Ken Holmes, that actually it wasn't the Vulture Peak, which is the next hill, which you can see from the Sapatana caves. I think they were given in a lot of them in those caves, certainly some of them were, but anyway, the hill opposite is called the Vulture Peak. So it says many of those Mahayana teachings were given there. It just drew the right people, and somehow the people who were followers of the Buddha, very wonderful people working on their minds, but not ready for Mahayana, the loving kindness, the deeper shunyata, emptiness, they somehow didn't attend those teachings. I've seen this with lamas. Somehow some people just don't make it to this, and other people magically never even intended to be there, but something draws them, and there they are, they get it. So anyway, the second turning of the wheel of Dharma at the Vulture Peak and other places could have happened any time to anyone who was ready, would have happened, but probably the big teachings to mass groups of people that happened would only happen once the basic message of suffering and its causes and freedom from suffering and its causes is well in place, what we call the Four Great Truths. Until that's very, very clear, then you have to be careful about teaching about loving kindness. People's minds can get mixed up. Loving kindness, compassion, the bodhisattva way. See, first you're teaching, get out. It's a mess. In the bodhisattva teachings, it's people need your help. Get in. Get out, get in. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. So you can use the get in there and help people as an excuse for your ego not recognizing itself and getting out. Does that make sense? I'm not trying to be clever with words. I see this all the time. When people are going deeper into their minds, they're seeing what ego really means, how we cling so hard. And we cling not just to things and people, we cling to ideas, we cling to our own conditioning, because without it, we go mad. You can't just let go of everything and become without reference points. You'd be really crazy. So we need to go step by step. And sometimes when the next step is too difficult to face, then the idea of, oh yeah, but I'm going to exist and I'm going to be good in existence and I'm going to really help people and I'm going to be a bodhisattva. It's kind of a new ego. It's better than an old ego, but nevertheless, it's a need to be, a need to manifest, a need to have something you can cling on to as I am, and look at me, and I'm worth something. I have value, and so on. So the Buddha needed his basic message to be really well in place, meaning that people have practiced it for years, maybe decades. And then teaching the bodhisattva way on top of that is very healthy, very healthy. So it says at the Vulture Peak, the two main aspects of the second turning of the wheel of Dharma are compassion and deeper voidness, which doesn't just take apart delusions of self, but it takes apart all of our deluded projections of other people, the world, what's going on, all of our fixed reference points that keep our mind small, that stop it from becoming the natural Buddha mind. So the second turning is mainly those two things, wisdom and compassion, the wisdom being shunyata, emptiness of things. As far as a path of practice and the supportive teachings for that path go, the first turning is destructive. We need to destroy ego. That's the cause of the suffering. The second turning of the wheel of Dharma, even though we talk about loving kindness and compassion and so on, it is basically destructive. Look at Nagarjuna's teachings if you don't believe me. It's all about no, this doesn't exist. This isn't what it seems to be. There isn't this. Karma, cause and effect, time, 27 chapters. No. Delusion. First two turnings are destructive. Negations. So let's assume, whenever it is, you have somebody who is ripe, who has the karmic propensity, who's been close to Buddha in all of his beautiful presence of mind. So they get these two messages fully. Sick and fed up of ego, know how to get rid of it through meditation, mindfulness, analysis. Full of love for all sentient beings, but practicing helping them in a full awareness of shunyata, the dreamlike interdependent nature of everything. There's nothing you can grasp. Then they are ready for the third turning, which is not located to any place. First turning, Deer Park. Second turning, Vulture Peak. Third turning, whenever somebody's ready, really. But related to that third turning, and I sent you a list in the support document, depending which way we look at it, we have a handful of actual sutras, Buddha's teachings, that we can see as the basis. All the Tibetan schools rely on a Sangha's teachings about Buddha nature. Buddha nature is the essence of the third turning. In the third turning, Buddha teaches Buddha nature, which is an English term that's not really a translation. It is called Tathagatagarbha. Tathagatagarbha. Garbha means the womb, And Tathagata means of those who have become it. The womb for becoming it is one meaning of garbha, womb. Another meaning of garbha is like the very essential seed for something, for becoming it. So the third turning teaches Tathagatagarbha. It's most brilliantly for all the Tibetan schools and the Zen schools summed up by the Sangha's teaching. We're going to study a short version of a condensation of a Sangha's teaching by the third Karmapa in the next talks in this series. So there we have an affirmation. In the first two turnings, we have a negation. Negation means it's not true. There is no ego. And then there is, like in the Heart Sutra, there is no seeing consciousness, hearing consciousness, this, that, all of those words of the Dharma path. The components of mind that we study, they don't really exist as absolutes. They're just helpful ideas that help us free ourselves. So we're saying they're not true. We're negating. So the question comes, what is true? What is true? So the third turning of the wheel of Dharma is an affirmation, not a negation. Negation, affirmation. The affirmation of what we really are. So we're not a personal ego, but what are we really? First turning. Second turning, all these components of mind, the five aggregates and all their subdivisions, all dharmas, all things that we witness. We've seen what they're not through the second turning teachings. Now, what are they really? Who are we really? What is everything that is going on really? This is what the Buddha teaches in the third turning. It only makes sense if you've worked so thoroughly with seeing how ego projections come out of your mind. This only comes if you've seen so thoroughly, like according to Nagarjuna's teachings, how we make things and processes real, even like cause and effect. It's only a human idea. Nagarjuna says there is no cause and effect in reality, just helpful for us to see things that way, and so on. So we are all really and truly Buddha. So what was it that Buddha achieved that made him Buddha and so helpful to us all? What is, if we use everyday language, Buddha mind? This is what the third turning of the wheel of Dharma teaches, and it is very subtle because it is not teaching a something you can find. In our last but one course about Buddha nature, about Mahamudra prayer, we saw many verses. You can't say this is it, you can't say this is not it, and so all of that comes from the Buddha nature teachings, the third turning of the wheel of Dharma. It is very subtle. I think one of the best explanations I got was from Trungpa Rinpoche, Khenchen Trungpa Rinpoche. And he said, Buddha nature, well, we just cannot experience it as something. You can look at a flame, that's a flame, you can experience it. We can have meditation experience, but we cannot, in a dualistic way, experience Buddha nature. So what is it? It is the nature of our mind. It is the nature of this mind. So Trungpa Rinpoche says, this is like somebody, very famous somebody, that nobody's ever seen. They live in a house, in a huge estate, which has high walls and barbed wire fences. And everyone's wondering, who is that? But they don't even know if the person's a man or a woman. They don't know anything. So what do? Well, he said, first of all, you can get a very good telescope and go up a mountain and look at their laundry line. Maybe you can tell by the clothes they wear. You know, it's a man, it's a woman, it's a younger person, it's an older person. And then you can bribe the refuge mirth, the disposal people, and go through their dustbins to see what they eat, what they throw away. And you can do this and you can do that. So you can piece together lots and lots of evidence that gives you some idea about this thing, this person that cannot be directly experienced by ordinary people. And then one day, you meet one of the person's attendants, servants, who helps you to get in and to meet that person. So most people can't, but you can get. So what happens is that our imagination cannot imagine Buddha mind. Our thoughts cannot think Buddha mind. All of our past experience, which has been through these 5 senses, can't inform us about Buddha mind. For instance, if you've experienced a sparrow, sparrow, and if you've experienced the color purple, I can say a purple sparrow, and you can imagine it. There are no things from our experiential vocabulary that we can put together and say, that's what Buddha mind is like. We can get lots of ideas, but no real knowledge. So Asangha's teachings in 404 verses give us many, many clues, and in particular so that we know what Buddha mind is not. It's not a something, an experience somewhere. It's not a somebody. It's mistaken for God or gods by other religions. It's not just nothingness. It's not a nihilism, big blank cosmic emptiness in that sense. It is Tathagatagarbha, is about the nature of this mind, not about a something, not about a certain state of mind. The nature of this mind and its ability to produce samsara, not intentionally, but its ability to be made into samsara by causes and conditions, and its ability to be made into the path and nirvana by other causes and conditions. What is this mind? Is it basically neutral, like a blank sheet of paper where you can paint a beautiful thing or a horrible thing? Is it blank, neutral, that can become good or evil? Is it basically good with qualities, which is what the Buddha nature teachings tell us, 64 qualities, primarily millions of others? Does it have any influence, activity? Yes, for the good, for the liberation of beings from suffering. This is the nature, the character of this mind, but it isn't something nor somebody. So we explore that. It's very profound. It takes months to study the Buddha nature teachings, even just the ideas. If we put it into practice through Mahamudra or Dzogchen, it takes us years of practice to really get there. But we're looking at this third turning of the wheel of Dharma, which really means when the Buddha shares his deepest heart secret with his disciples. This is what it really is. This is what I really am. This is what everything really is. This peace, this clarity, this wisdom, this compassionate love, this power to help, but that can only help those who are open to be helped. So basically, we have those three things: wisdom, compassion, power to help, is the true nature of our mind. So I'm going to have the privilege of trying to share the third Karmapa's synopsis of Maitreya's 404 verses about Buddha nature, but we need to know that Tibetans all ascribe to the idea of three turnings of the wheel of Dharma, that the Buddha basically showed that what we all need, what suffering is, and that we can get out of it. To those who were ready, he showed the loving, compassionate path of deepest voidness of everything. And then for those who were cleaned of all the delusions through those first two turnings, negations, who weren't going to bring new, wrong projections onto Buddha nature because they'd worked with their minds and got rid of all those delusions. Then he taught Buddha nature. We can't really see them chronologically. When you're with a Buddha mind, an enlightened person, the truth can happen at any time. And it might be happening for you and for the person next to you that they're not getting anything. But we're looking at three depths of the Buddha's teaching. Okay, well, I think that's all I've got to say. It's been a bit of a mishmash of different things, a bit of history, a bit of reflection. Please do read the support document so that you get the main details of the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma. So let's dedicate anything that was good, anything that was useful today, and then we spend a little time together with questions or reflections. Sonam diye tamche zekpane, tomne nye pedranam pamchene, je ganachi palap, trukpaye, sipe tsole, drowaresho, janchup semcho rinpoche, maje panam jejochik, jepa nyampa me padam, kongne, kongdu, pelwarasho, gewa dien yoduda, Chaja Chenpo Drukjone, Drowa Chikjang Malopa, Deye Sala, Kaparesho. So, thank you all very much. And yeah, a bit rushed, and lots of bits and pieces together. But if you've got anything you'd like to comment or any question you'd like to ask, please do. And Charlie, hello, I'm glad you made it. Great.
Hi, Ken. It's Yael.
Hi there. Hi, Yael.
You said something which was like a bombshell for me, actually. In the practice, many times we make aspirations. May I be this, may I be that, may I will be able to do this and that and the other.
Mm-hmm.
Like in Medicine Buddha, you have like 12 of those.
Yeah.
And you know, until now, I've been trying to put some emotion into it, to feel it, and you know, to make a resolve, and I will do this and da da da. Now, you know, you came and said that it's actually it's another form of ego. So how do I relate to it, to those aspirations? What do I visualize? What do I feel? What do I do?
Yeah, uh, there are many ways in Buddhism, and most of them are what we call a gradual path. Step by step, A to B, B to C, C to D, and in the end you end up in Z. Some schools, like some Zen schools, and especially the Huashang tradition that could have established itself in Tibet at the time of Guru Rinpoche, wanted to kind of not take a gradual path, but to work to have a direct leap into the absolute truth. And in the end, it was causing conflict because people on the gradual path were just no ego, getting rid of ego, absolutely just pure mind. So there was a debate organized in Tibet. Whoever won the debate would stay and become Tibetan Buddhism. Whoever lost had to either convert or leave Tibet. This is the story in Tibet. So in 8th century, under the king's auspices, reinforced by the king's army, they had this debate. It lasted about 2 years, long debate. And in the end, the Huashang Zen tradition lost, and the gradual path teachings prevailed, which have been in Tibet ever since. We have to modify that, but let's not get in the details, with Dzogchen and so on. But anyway, gradual path. So we are not going to get enlightened tomorrow, right? It took Buddha 3 cosmic eons on the Bodhisattva path. Even with the best of Vajrayana, they say it takes 16 lives, 7 lives if you're really totally committed with all the right circumstances. 3, and then for 1 or 2 individuals only in the whole history of Tibet in one lifetime. Just a handful of people, maybe you can get enlightened in one lifetime. So we're going to be reborn. We're going to feel like somebody somewhere. This is inevitable. So the gradual path works with that. Now we're like an ego. Taisitupa, I forget the details, but he gives a lovely analogy of like training a dog. He says, first you've got a wild dog, it just runs everywhere, it's completely undisciplined. And then first you have to teach it to be happy on the lead. And then in the end it becomes happy on the lead, and so happy you can let it off the lead and it trots by your side, and so on. We have to tame the mind. So we do that in a user-friendly way. The way the beginnings of the Bodhisattva path are expressed is you're not going to be any longer a harmful human being, but a caring, loving Bodhisattva. We exchange heavy ego for lighter ego, full of aspirations for the future, and envisioning a path. And as we learn about the path, we see that ego will gradually disappear, will become more and more integrated with other people. We will feel more and more connected with other people, part of them. In the end, we are other people. There is no more me, but we know it's a gradual process. So we change heavy ego for lighter ego, and especially once we get into Vajrayana, then we're not just identifying with me, the Bodhisattva, but we start to see my real Bodhisattva self is Chenrezig, is Tara, is a being of light. And so step by step, it becomes easier to go from A to B, B to C, C to D. Depending, it says there are different types of people. They call them sharp minds, dull minds. But depending, whenever we're ready to understand how it all is an illusion, and that even our wonderful Bodhisattva path is making a better illusion, a better dream than a damaging dream, but it's still a dream. So then we can dissolve. If we understand that sooner than later, it doesn't change anything, because we'll realize that in practice, day after day, as we meet people, we meet life, we experience things, we're going to react as a me. We need to work on that. And so we make aspirations to help ourselves. But from early on, we can even then start to see how dreamlike the whole process is. I don't know if that helps.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. It's always the biggest challenge, I think, always, no matter which level of Dharma, but particularly in Tibetan Buddhism and in Vajrayana, to feel the weight of absolute truth and relative truth and put them together. How, and when we, in our next course, we'll be looking at that, how the power of karma makes us be reborn, like it or not. And then, given the facts that are there through the power of karma, how we can change our mind and our mind's attitude and interpretation of everything. So to feel the weight of relative reality and ultimate, because there are people who say, oh, it's all void. They still need their breakfast the next day, and they still get up when the dustmen don't come, upset when the dustmen don't, There's still somebody, even though they can say it's all void, it's all like a dream. But weighing those two is an absolute art, and putting them together so that our practice is healthy and happy and wise and intelligent is a skill we have to learn.
Hi. I don't know if I'm going to open up a rabbit hole here, but I've always, at a very simplistic level, understood that the Theravadan teachings to be around conduct, and therefore sort of similar to Hinayana. Is that right, or is that a very sort of dangerous oversimplification?
No, when we analyze, according to the Tibetan teachings, what's going on, then there is, we analyze three things. They're called view, that's about wisdom, meditation, which is about what you do in your deepest practice, and conduct. So we see in the Shravaka traditions, of which the Theravada is one, what is their wisdom? It's mainly about no self, non-ego. What is their meditation practice? It is shamatha, mainly the 4 dhyanas. And then what is their conduct? Then it's all their way of right conduct. And that brings a fourth thing, which is called result. If with that view and with their meditation practice and with their conduct, they can end up as an arhat. We compare that with the Bodhisattva's view and the Bodhisattva's meditation practice and the Bodhisattva's conduct, and we see how that can end up as Buddha. So there's two things. There's the basic theory of the three turnings and the type of Buddhists that emerge from them. That's the theory of psychologies and a possible path for different psychologies of people. And then we have to look at history, which is what happened in Tibet, what happened in Sri Lanka, what happened in Japan, and what really goes on. Even if in their original thing, they did lots and lots of stuff. Basically, if you go to their monasteries, you see their greatest teachers, what's going on now. So we can't always equate Theravada with Shravaka. You can't always do that. Conduct is very important. In the teachings on refuge in Tibetan Buddhism, it says one of the reasons we have the three refuges, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, is that they become important in different traditions. So it says if we start with the Sangha, it says these are very important in the Shravaka traditions, which is nowadays Theravada tradition. So the Sangha, the fraternity, the feeling of, not being alone, sharing conduct, rituals, chanting together, all of this, being part of the Sangha is probably the most important thing. Dharma is secondary, it's very important. And then the Buddha was the person who gave us all of this. Buddha was important as the founder, but the main thing is community. They say and then they talk about Pratyeka Buddhas, which we don't find these days, but anyway, for them, Dharma is important. We do see the human equivalents. For some humans, being in the community, being in the Dharma center, being in the Sangha, monk and nun, that's the most important thing, living that life. For the Pratyeka Buddhas, the Dharma, the knowledge, is what we want. I think lots of Westerners want the knowledge. Whether you live this community or you don't, you want to get the knowledge straight and deeper and best knowledge and highest quality. Dharma is the prime of the three. But they say for the Bodhisattva in the Mahayana, the Buddha, as our role model, as our example, benchmark, is most important. And of course, we need the blah, blah, blah Dharma to know how to do it. We need the support of like minds to do it. But in the Mahayana, the being of Buddha, the purity of Buddha, and so on, is the most important thing. So it would be understandable that the whole way of life, the monastic way of life, the conduct, the community has become very, very important in Theravada.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah.
Ken, just
Hi, Vicky. Yeah.
I am a bit poorly, sorry. People say do no harm, do good, and train your mind. Do they relate to the three different traditions as well?
No. Okay. That comes from the first turning of the Wheel of Dharma, and it's Buddha's own words summing up his teaching. I'm not sure if that one's in. Yeah, it comes up in a couple of texts, but when we come to the second and third turnings of the Wheel of Dharma, they unpack that in different and sometimes sort of fuller ways. But that's the real basis. Do no harm. I think in the first turning, it's if you're going to do anything, do good. But the main thrust of the first turning and the Shravaka tradition is get out. Not doing anything, meditating, being in retreat, being in monastic circumstances. It's where you've got all the time to tame your mind. But if you're going to do anything, do good. And tame your mind means find peace within yourself, mainly a state of irreversible peace. When we look in the Mahayana, then it's still, of course, do no harm. But in particular, don't do harm to yourself by the way you deprive your mind of its natural loving care, loving for yourself as well as for everybody else. So don't harm yourself by shutting down your heart, I suppose, if we put it in very everyday language. And then do good as much as you can, because we need, there's a natural kind of power that comes into us, nice power, through lifetimes of doing good. And in this time doing good, it gives a health, it's like eating good food, taking right vitamins, helping others as much as we can brings a health into our Dharma, mind and thinking. And then tame your mind means bringing it to that knowledge of the interdependent, dreamlike nature of everything and letting go rigid references that keep us in a limited state of security.
Thank you. And I often feel that I'm at this kind of level rather than the Mahayana level.
It's wonderful. They're all so wonderful. They're all so good. And we can't deny who we are. We just have to do the best with what we are. And they're all good. This is the point. It's not as though we've got a bad Buddhism. We work with what we have, but we're open to the possibility that, you know, tomorrow miracles could happen, and an even better way, an even unimaginably brighter way could open up. But then whatever we have to work with, whatever we can really and truly do today, that's the very best thing. So there's no best teaching. Best teaching is the one that, you know, suits us today, that's relevant today. The rest is just blah, blah, blah. No way to compare.
Thanks.
It looks like we've come to the end of today's session. So I just want to say hello to a couple of people I didn't get to say hello to at the beginning. It's lovely to see you, Andrew, and great to see you. And take good care, everybody. And for those of you who are coming back for the Karmapa's teachings, it's in a fortnight's time. Next weekend is our Tonglen practice together. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank
you.
you.
Ken. Thank you, Ken. Try now. Try, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Ken.